we go, here we go, here we go, here we come and go, here we come and go. Here we go, here we go. Here we go, here we go. Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go.
Welcome everyone. Another episode from Containers from the Couch here with the host today. We have different hosts for different shows. The Containers from the Couch have become a place where we do a lot of AWS content for different aspects, from ECS to EKS. And today, actually, we're going to talk about infrastructure as code pipeline, CI/CD, that part that it goes before you deploy into production. I'm very excited because I have with me Jim for Nirmata. Jim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone. I'm Jim Bagladia, co-founder, CEO at Nirmata, also maintainer of Kyverno, which is the CNCF project.
Yep. And I'm Carlos Santana. I'm a solutions architect, CNCF ambassador. And if you've been in any of the recent KubeCons or KCDs or CNCF live streams, you have seen Jim or myself. So Jim is a very well known from the open source community. Also owner, a co-founder of the company Nirmata, which supports the CNCF projects in open source. And today I'm excited because we'll be talking about Kyverno, one of the tools that Jim started, and then other companies joined, right? This is the CNCF projects. A lot of companies contribute and use it. And don't get afraid. Jim is a hardcore developer. He's the CEO of the company, but I always like to talk to him because you don't get a chance to talk to CEOs that actually have a CLI. They can do Go, they can do Kubernetes. And I heard that you start looking into Agentic AI. I think maybe we'll do some of that today.
Yeah, no, very cool. It's an exciting time to be building and developing stuff. So many new things. So lots of fun to be had.
Yeah, and you can find Jim in LinkedIn and also in the Kubernetes Slack. He's a technical co-founder, so he's very well known in the community and also in terms of like contributing back to the open source community, like getting folks to be enabled with these CNCF technologies. So Jim, what do we have for today? What's the agenda that we have? A lot. I think we can tell folks what Kyverno is and some other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share, and I'll pull up, a few things as we're talking. So Kyverno, as a lot of you might know, started off as a CNCF project, which was focused on policy as code in Kubernetes, right?
You can show the website. People, where do they find Kyverno?
Let me pull up the right site, and I'll. So if we go to this kyverno.io, that's the main site for Kyverno, and one of the things, of course, as Kubernetes has evolved, Kyverno also continues to evolve. So I want to talk a little bit about that and mention the evolution of Kyverno itself and how we have kind of transformed Kyverno into kind of where we are today, right? So one thing we presented at KubeCon EU is some of the new policy types we are adding to Kyverno. Something called validating policy, image validating policy, mutating policy. Also, we will add generating and cleanup policy, which is coming in the next release. And the reason for that is, although Kyverno started in Kubernetes, still is very focused on being native to Kubernetes. The community has always said, hey, we love Kyverno, but we want to use it for other things as well, right? And as Kubernetes introduced Cell, which is Common Expressions Language, and a few other features into Kubernetes, we kind of wanted to expand the scope of Kyverno as well, right? So that's kind of the idea and the journey we're on as we're evolving Kyverno. So one of the questions we get, so by the way, in terms of stats and usage, Kyverno is one of the top 20 projects in the CNCF. We're something at about 3.4 billion downloads, right? So image pulls, so very actively used, lots of large companies and other kind of customers and other folks using Kyverno.
And in
But one
production, I want to highlight that, right? Kyverno is not a new CNCF tool.
right,
I think it before 2020, 2019, right? At that time
it's
frame.
yeah, it's been like 4+ years, almost coming up to 5 years in this fall, right?
Yeah, we're
So
2025. So, and the other thing I was going to say, me, right, representing AWS, I work with a lot of AWS customers using EKS in production, and Kyverno comes up as a tool they use in production. There's sometimes like tools that are experimenting and they're using staging. Kyverno is actually something that they use in production when I ask them, and usually ask them the whole stack. But I ask them like, what are you doing for governance and policy? Some customers say, we're thinking about it. And I say like,
right.
you have to do it. For those ones that are
Yep.
doing it, Kyverno is one of them that they're coming up in terms of open source. And then some of the customers are actually going beyond Kyverno and using it in Nirmata, right? In your product offering.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because Kyverno is a policy enforcement point, right? So it's great to have that in your pipelines. It's great to have that in your clusters, and of course for other, services, including, as the community evolves, we're also kind of looking at some of these AI ML workflows. But the challenge is, how do you manage all these policies at scale? How do you get all the reports? How do you manage, like the right policies and the right versions are in the right clusters, and the fact that they're actually running and working, right? So that's where Nirmata and Control Hub comes in, and I'll show a little bit of that. But just to your point, like it's interesting about, like in CNCF surveys, about 30-40% of the communities today using policy as code. And it's something that needs to be better understood and better kind of adopted, because if you're running any production Kubernetes clusters, first of all, Kubernetes is not secure by default. Even if you're running runtime security tools, that's typically not enough, and you need to add policy as code is not just for security. It can also help with some very critical automation and other operational use cases, right? Like doing namespaces as a service, or doing cost optimizations, or automating other kind of cleanup, those type of things. If you're running any scalable platform, you're going to need that. And to provide self-service to developers, you're also going to need policy as code. So even if you don't adopt Kyverno, definitely look at how you can leverage policy as code. And the other alternative, of course, in the community is Open Policy Agent, and Gatekeeper is also a CNCF project.
Yeah.
And in Kubernetes itself, now there's some options for policy, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that and show what Kyverno does above and beyond that.
And for that slide number 4, I think you should ask, and you mentioned it slightly, is cost, right? It helps you
Yes.
with policy and governance, but cost. When you have policy, you have guardrails. At the end of the day, you're doing guardrails for managing these Kubernetes clusters, a fleet of clusters, and we'll get to that in a minute, of like how Control Hub manages a fleet of cluster. When somebody's using EKS in production, I ask them, they don't have one cluster. No one has one cluster, but they have a fleet of clusters, and they have to have some governance, to have some guardrails, to have cost management. You don't want developers, for better or worse, to set up pods that take 2 gigs of memory, or they spin up 3 machines with GPUs. How do you catch that, right? How do you prevent that extra cost and actually then discover it to reporting? Because one thing is like, you can stop it, or maybe you want to just find where things are not working the way they should.
Yeah, no, great questions and points, right? So the basics are, of course, to make sure that every manifest has the proper resource settings, etc. But even then, like what happens, and look, I'm a developer myself. If what I will do is, I say just put 4 gig, 8 gig, even if my application doesn't need it, right? Because it doesn't, like I'd rather be on the safe side. So one of the things that we see, which is a very powerful use case with Kyverno, is integrating it with VPA Recommender, right? And we have a blog post and other details on this too. on how you can automate, like at least alerting for developers to say, hey, you configured 8 gig, or you configured, like half a GPU, but you're not even utilizing 10% of that, right? And you can actually show the data and recommend the right settings. Now, if you want to go a step further, if you're bold enough, you can also, with Kyverno, we have mutate policies to automate that and set that. So there's in dev tests, etc. We've had customers and folks like save up to like 50 to 80% cost just by doing those simple policy checks and automation.
No, I mean, mutation webhooks are very common on like the defaults from Kubernetes are not defaults that work for everyone, right?
Right.
Like if you specify a pod, you don't have to specify resource and limits, right? But a mutation webhook can say, I'm going to enforce it, right? Instead of going to the left of like trying to find hundreds of GitHub repos and trying to manage Helm charts to put it there, you catch it security, right? Security wise, you have to want to catch it at the source at entry point, right? At this, you're not getting in, and this is the value that you get.
Yeah, and it's because Kyverno can operate both. I'll show you how it operates in cluster and in the pipeline. The beauty is you can apply the policies in both places, right? So and it's very fast and optimized. So you can do checks in your pipeline, and you can do checks at admission controls and periodically scan within your cluster. So that completes that whole from all the way from code to actual runtime type of checking which is required. Yeah, and then
I think today we're going to see. I want to see that because the perception is like Kyverno is something that you Helm install, right? And do you have Kyverno in your cluster? But today I want to say how can we use Kyverno policies outside my Kubernetes environment, or maybe preventing me from creating a wrong EKS cluster, right?
Right. So we'll look at both. I want to show three things, right? One is we'll start with using it in cluster, but with validating policies. That's the new policy type. Then we will look at running scans for Kubernetes manifest in a pipeline, and then finally we'll go to Terraform and we'll try to do some remediation with like some of the newer AI tools like Q and other things, and see how that goes. But one thing I want to quickly mention, because a lot of a common question we get is, what about the Kubernetes says validating admission policy and mutating admission policy? So why do I need Kyverno, right? And it's a good question, and certainly you should start with the built-in types if you don't have anything else.
Yep.
But what Kyverno does is it really extends these built-in types to policy as code. So even if you're using VAP and MAP, you still need reporting. You still need exception management. You still want to do things like, shift left, like we're talking about, and we'll see. And all of those things are not available, and you still want to do background scans. So none of that works out of the box with VAP or MAP. But Kyverno can automatically do that even for the built-in types, right? Which is something people don't realize, is you can just put Kyverno on top of the built-in policy types, and we will provide all those features even for Kubernetes types. And if you write a policy in Kyverno format, it will automatically generate a VAP or MAP whenever it can. So extremely powerful kind of combination, and very much focused on the most optimal way of running the policy. In addition to that, like we talked about, use cases for cleanup and generation and image verification, you cannot do with built-in types. Complex checks, and I'll show an example, cannot do that with built-in types, right? And of course, if you're doing Terraform and stuff, you can't do that with VAP or MAP, but you can with Kyverno policies, which are also based on Cell and other things, right? So a lot of good reasons to use Kyverno, and we're constantly kind of expanding and doing the features, but it's not one or the other. It's kind of like a better together story, really, because Kyverno builds on top of these types and a lot makes them even more powerful.
Yeah, and the intention of Kubernetes is create extension points, right? The imagine if validation and mutation wasn't an API from the API server. Like, how do you integrate? They're built there to be extended, to be like it's as a reference implementation for people to build on top of Kubernetes, not that you take Kubernetes and that's what I go to production.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely right. So it's interesting kind of evolution. And certainly in the community, the beauty of open source is it's always evolving. There's always new things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's look at a few policies, right? So I have a very, I'll start with something like I said, in cluster. And one common thing we also hear about Kyverno versus OPA sometimes is, oh, Kyverno is great for simple checks, but what about more complex, right? And I wanted to start right off the bat with a more complex
Yeah.
policy, because Kyverno can do very powerful checks and can actually, if you combine like mutation, generation, validation, you get really extremely good use cases, right? So what this is doing is it's restricting image registries based on a config map, right? So here you have a config map, you're saying which registries to allow and not allow. And then the Kyverno policy itself is kind of restricting these, to say, okay, I'm going to allow it or not. So now notice this is a validating policy, which is a new policy type. And this language here is common expressions language, right? So it's
Since how new is the validation policies? Is it from the last year or this year?
from earlier this year. We announced
Oh,
that
this
that
year.
was from KubeCon EU, from 1.14 was the release where we introduced this, so it's fairly new.
Okay, so if
But
you're
we are
watching this, they were talking about new things in Kyverno
yeah
that you may be aware. So if you have looked in Kyverno before, yeah, I know Kyverno. I had to use the Kyverno language. Right now, you're moving to validation policies, and you're using CEL, which is the Kubernetes upstream. They choose to use that one for other type of validations. And other projects are using it, like the Crow project that
yes
I'm also working on.
yes. Yeah, and this is very much, the if you look at, and I'll just pull up validating admission policy. Um, and we'll look at this.
From
Uh,
upstream.
yeah, from the
Yep.
upstream, because the idea is it's very similar, right? And what we want to do is like, this is what a standard validating policy looks like. And if you notice in the Kyverno policies, all we are doing, if I go back to our docs and kind of look at Kyverno validating, like the policy types, we have a new section on validating policy. It basically extends the same validating policy with a few additional fields, like the
Interesting.
evaluation mode, webhook configuration, which are needed. But you can actually take the same policy, add a few fields, and it becomes a Kyverno policy, right?
So it
So
helps. It helps someone that maybe started with a POC, right? They're 6 weeks in
yep,
with the POC. They wrote some validation admission policy because maybe there's one knowledgeable person in the team that knows upstream Kubernetes and start writing
yeah,
policies, a bunch of them, and then realize, well, for production, that's not enough. We have to
right.
move into Kyverno. So transforming this is simple right now. Like with Agentic AI, it should be like a no brainer. But
Absolutely.
you're not going from zero to something totally different, right? You're just
Yep.
taking the stuff that you created and making them Kyverno policies.
Exactly. So this is you see the structure is very similar, but this policy is obviously a little bit more complex. Just to quickly explain what it does is it actually runs a command to fetch the config map in cluster, and then parses that to see what the allowed registries are, extracts out all the containers from your spec. So whether it's a deployment or a pod spec or others, it'll extract that. And then it says that every container must be using an allowed registry. That's the policy, right? So about 30 lines of YAML, very straightforward. But you can now write this complex policy so like if I now kind of do vpol is the validating policy. So this is already running in my local cluster. So let's try to see how this can get applied. If I do run nginx, so let's say if I do GHCR, it tells me, no,
No.
this is not allowed, because let's go back and see what did we allow, right? So we said foo and bar.
And the thing is,
So
you're wanting to you're actually showing some of the best practices, right? The list of the valid register in the config map. They're not in
right,
line into the policy.
exactly, because you
Because you
might
have
want
that
to vary.
get resource, right? You have that get resource that you have in the policy. Is that something that you
Yes,
can do in upstream Kubernetes validation language? I
you
want to
can.
say no, right?
y-
Fetch
Yeah,
any
you cannot.
resource. You cannot go out of your boundaries.
Right. You have to, in the Kubernetes, you can have a parameter binding,
Yeah,
but
but it's
it's not
in line.
right. It's
That's not kind of best separation of concern.
right.
So just to highlight for folks that are writing those
Yeah,
policies, they will start feeling like fatigue because they're putting all this logic in line in the policy where they cannot have separation of like, hey, the config map is living maybe
exactly.
in a different repo. The security repo it owns the config
Absolutely.
map, and the policies live in the policy repo. And the only thing that you have to change is config map for this cluster and config map for that cluster.
Right.
The same policy, but two different config maps, right?
Yeah.
Different
Like
clusters.
in your dev test, you can have a different config map. In your production, you'll have a different config map. So very, very straightforward to create those type of, that flexibility. And you can also, by the way, here we're showing a config map. We have customers using a similar kind of get. There's a HTTP get,
Oh,
which
really?
does a secure
An
call.
API.
Yeah, you can call into like we have one large, customer doing even checks to like the ticketing system, other things. And by the way, Kyverno can cache this, right? So all of these things you cannot do in the API server, of course, which gives you a lot of power and flexibility in Kyverno as you look at more complex operational use cases and codifying these with policies, right? Um, so yeah, that's a simple kind of example but of a it looks simple, but it was actually underneath. We got a fair amount of complexity compared to like like a hello world type of thing. So notice when I did it with the right registry, of course,
Yeah,
it
it
allowed
works.
it. And that's kind of how a basic check works, right? But let's kind of switch to now a more complex set of checks, which we want to apply to manifest. If we want to shift left, apply them in the pipeline, right?
Also, that's
And
a question that comes up in the chat. Like, for example, this one, right? Look, Patrick says, can I
Mhm.
shift left with Kyverno policies and run the validations on my config in CI/CD, the same
Yeah.
policy that I'll be using my cluster? So I think he's referring to a
Y-
Kubernetes manifest file sitting in disk and sitting in
yes.
the cluster, right?
Yes, so and you can automate all of this, of course, in your pipeline. And what I'll show is just how, and here, by the way, I'm using the Nirmata command line, which uses Kyverno policies, but adds more features. It can connect to your central control hub. It will do, like, we'll also see some remediation. So what it actually did underneath the scenes, and if I switch to my let me see if I can find the Nirmata console. Here it is. I have certain policy sets configured, right? Including some Terraform and some best practice policies. So now what it will do is it automatically fetch these policies. It showed me, like, it ran pod security standards, RBAC best practices. And the nice thing is I just configured it centrally. I don't have to do this on every repo. I can have a central, even a CI action, which can then just say, and if the policies change, again, it's like that separation of concerns. You change it in one place, you don't have to go and update all of the other things, right? But now it showed me the scan. It's showing me like, some text over here. But what I also kind of did, I don't know if you got that, but I did a minus remediate on the command.
Dash
And
dash
it,
remediate. Okay.
right. And it automatically remediated the resource. So this calls out to Control Hub and says, hey, make this compliant. Because with developers, you want to make it easy for
Very
them, right?
interesting. And you show in the
But
previous one, it says like I've tried to deploy, it didn't work. Well, thank you so much, Jim. Like, how do I how do I fix it? How do I make it? How do I make my YAML
yep,
valid? Right?
exactly. So now with Nirmata, what you can do is it will, when you run this, it internally uses, an AI tool. It kind of remediates, and it will do the test before it sends it back, and then tells you, hey, here's the patch. And you can apply this patch. And right now I did remediate show, so I didn't update the file, but it can automatically update the file as well, which would, then now as a developer, I'm compliant and I can try my PR again in my CI pipeline.
Yeah, or
So
you have it in the GitHub action, right? In the GitHub action, you can
exactly.
run it and say, remediate this, or you can have like we release Amazon Q integration with
Yes.
GitHub that you can say, well, this is
It,
not passing. Well, fix it, and then the agent will go and run the
PR.
NTCLL, right?
Yep.
Tool.
Yeah, and we'll look at that for Terraform and see how it works. I
So
was
you're
playing
using the
around with.
AI for this in Nirmata, you get this value. So
Yes.
it's just to highlight for users that may think, and this show is watched by a
Mhm.
lot of advanced users, right? That they can say, yeah, they're not going to sit down and they're going to get it wrong because they're parsing the invalid assertion and trying to reverse
Right.
what will make this assertion work. And it's too complex to sit down to write all the permutations. But with AI, you have a chance of like getting a lot of things just figure out, right?
Correct. Yeah, and like the other thing, so AI, of course, there are sometimes challenges like hallucinations and other things, but we have added test tools and a pipeline which iterates on that, right? So before returning that back to the user, it will try it, make sure that the patch is valid, make sure that it's, and if there are some, problems, and see, this is also cool. So it's saying, hey, here's some additional things you should think about
Extra
if
things,
you
okay,
right, like we
recommendations.
talked about probes, resource limits, etc., right? So you can give your developers some nice
This
hints
is super cool.
with some recommendations like this, right? But yeah, this is like how easy it becomes, not just to scan but to help with remediation, help with other things, and developers can see this directly in their CI. Or if you want to kind of give access, a lot of our customers, developers will get access to Control Hub, and there they can also remediate. There you can also ask for exceptions and things like that, and I'll showcase that when we look at the Terraform
Okay,
policies. Yeah,
that's
so
fascinating.
let's switch to Terraform, right? Because that's where we want to, like, and here I just took the I think the AWS samples,
That's what
Terraform to create EKS, right? So we are creating an EKS cluster in auto.
this made me smile because my team, the solutions architect, are the ones that maintain these examples of using Terraform. And I was thinking, like, is team
Yep.
going to use the EKS random stuff out there, or it's going to use like best practices? I want to, so it's like it's using our stuff. So this is good, and not our stuff, but customers are. This is the way they
Yeah.
build EKS clusters. Like that's the how they do it. So we're going to go with a real example. A lot of people will say like, that's how we wrote our EKS Terraform.
Right. No, I have to admit I started with some random stuff, but
See?
quickly, saw some problems. So when I did some little bit more searching, I was happy to see the official, the samples, and they're well maintained, and I think that this worked pretty well. I kind of customized a few things because I just wanted it to run in my VPC, etc., for the demo. But then on this, I was thinking about, okay, auto mode already takes care of a lot of things, right? So it's a simpler configuration. But what else can we do? So there's obvious governance checks you want to do. And notice again, you see validating policy. But one important difference, the evaluation mode is now JSON instead of Kubernetes. So
So
that,
there's a question around this. I think this is a turning point, and somebody asked
yes.
this question: can Kyverno scan an output X Helm charts? Can I?
Well, if you render the Helm chart, yeah, you
To
can,
JSON, YAML is JSON, right? You're telling
right.
me like,
Any YAML or any JSON, Kyverno can scan and validate,
yeah,
just like OPA, right? So
yeah, and this will be the
anything,
standard way. Like you show the nginx.yaml,
right?
but you will be running in your GitHub action, right? You're going to Helm template, render, hydrate that Helm chart into Kubernetes resources, and then pass it through the
Exactly.
Nirmata CLI.
Yeah, and that's super easy to do. Like here, basically, I just, to make it simpler, I have a make file that just takes the, in your CI, you can run the plan, and then you can convert that to JSON and then run the policies against it, right? And we have samples for that too, but I want to just show it kind of manually over here for the demo.
What other
So,
options are there? Mode, JSON, and there are other modes?
so the two modes we support today are, so JSON includes YAML, right? So JSON
Like
YAML is
you cover
interchangeable.
99% of the things. I'm
Yeah,
just now thinking like, what
and
could be another
Kubernetes.
DevOps language? Maybe Dockerfile. I don't know. Or
Right. So Dockerfile also, so in the Nirmata command line automatically converts that to JSON. So that is built in. There are tools
also
out there
through
which can
converting
also
to
do it.
JSON. So
Yeah.
everything converts to JSON, I guess. Okay.
Yes. And even if you're now using this for your own authorization or something else, the most payloads are JSON, and so you can, even with like MCP, right? Underneath it's just JSON and XML, right? So you can
Yeah.
easily convert that to JSON and start doing some interesting policy checks, etc. Right?
So we already
But
have some fans that they're fans of the pattern of Kyverno plus Terraform is better. Yeah, some people don't
yeah,
realize that they need to be evaluating their Terraform plans, right? The Terraform code. They write it,
absolutely.
they test it. I'm for sure that there's a Terraform test framework, but what about guardrails? Like who's in charge of like a lot of platform engineering? And this is true story. A lot of platform engineering IT shops that I talk to that are like real people using Kubernetes in production at large scale. Some of them, they are platform teams that write
Mm,
Terraform, beautiful Terraform, and then they give it to developers to do Terraform applying the laptops, right? And
yeah,
so what can you do better than that? You should be that Terraform plan that they run, either a CI pipeline on their laptops, like
yep.
then that how they use their modules, right? I give you a module, but how you're using it, right? I need to put guardrails on how you're deploying this to the AWS cloud.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can run this in your pipeline, which is the best practice. With Nirmata, we also have a proxy which can, intercept any of these calls if you prefer that, and you can route, just point all of those through the proxy, and it will apply the policies there. So there's many, many different options and
Can you
deployment.
talk a little bit about the proxy? How's the proxy works?
Yeah, so it's a transparent forwarding, like an admission controller, right? But admission
Okay.
controller, you can put in front of your pipelines. So now, before it kind of hits like the AWS APIs or any other API, it will automatically apply the policies as well. So we call
Oh,
that a
okay.
cloud controller, and it's it supports ECS, EKS, Lambda, several other services, and we're constantly adding more services as well.
That's
Um,
great.
yeah, so the idea is with Control Hub, you get this kind of ability to apply policies. I don't know, I'm trying to find where I had there was a Control Hub slide across pipelines, clusters,
I
and
see.
cloud, right? So the whole idea is when you get one central place, you are managing policy as code. The enforcement is all through Kyverno, so it's all open, all understandable policies, but with centralized reporting, aggregation, summarization, exception management, remediation, a lot of other things that you're going to need to scale up and to automate this across your clusters and pipelines. But yeah, let's take a look. Let's run the actual now policy on Terraform, right, and see what it looks like. So here, what I'll do is instead of NCTL scan Kubernetes, I want to just do scan repository, and I'm gonna, so in
Terraform.
your, yeah, this JSON is what we want to do, right? So
That's the
again, it
Terraform
will
code for folks that are following along. Like we did a Terraform plan, get the output and converted that to .json.
exactly. So, and then once this plan is in JSON, you can pipe it and run it to policies. Notice here, I'm not telling it anything about the policies because it's automatically, because I'm connected to Control Hub, it'll fetch it. If you're running standalone, that works too. You can just supply the policies or put that somewhere as a, like in GitHub Actions as a variable or something you want to manage which policy sets to apply. But see, it pulled down this EKS auto mode best practices, which I've just configured in Control Hub to point to the same repo itself. So if I go back to Control Hub, I look at this policy set here. I have it, I'm just pointing to a GitHub repo, and this can be a private repo or can be one of our published policy sets, which you get with Control Hub, and then it just will pull those down. Or you
That's
could
very
distribute.
interesting. Actually, that's very interesting to highlight. Like, it's not that
Yeah,
you have to like send the policies and upload
no,
into Control Hub. You can say, "Hey, Control Hub, my policies lives in this Git." So you're actually doing GitOps, right?
we're absolutely we fully believe in GitOps, and it's a bit harder to design things this way in Architect, but we wanted to make it very flexible. And our customers, are very savvy users in Kubernetes and GitOps, so they believe in this as well.
So what is
So
this? Yeah, and what are these best practices? A set of policies that you already have in
Yes.
Mata, or they're shared somewhere?
Yes, so we have a curated set of policies. There's about 100 plus policies, and we have ECS best practices, EKS best practices. We're creating Lambda as well. So, but these are, some few policies I chose for just auto mode, right? And these three policies are highlighting that, hey, you want to set proper log types, you have some allowed versions, and then you would want to make your endpoints, private, right? So now if I go to Control Hub again, and it shows me the full report, which I can share if I want to kind of go back and, share this with my team, or Control Hub can automatically also send it to Slack or, other messaging or Jira. So you can create Jira tickets automatically. A lot of other flexibility on alerting users on how to, manage these and what to do. And then with the automated remediation, you kind of get the full value to say, okay, how do I fix this, right? So I
Can we
want to
take a look?
actually use
Can
Q
we
for
take a
that.
look at the check versions policy to see how it
Yeah,
looks?
yeah. Let's dive in, right? Let me pull that up. So this is the check versions.
So
So
what is this?
again, validating policy. This is just some metadata, right, for help and stuff. Then it says evaluation mode is JSON. And now what it's doing is based on the Terraform, it's saying, okay, look at all of the changes, but I want to only look at my resource changes for which are of type AWS EKS cluster, and if I'm creating and updating a cluster. And in there, there's an attribute called allowed versions, which needs to be set to one of these values. So here we're just inlining the value, but again, like you saw, you can pull this from a separate, endpoint if you want. You can externalize this. Lots of flexibility, right? And then you're in the actual expression, the cell expression. You're just saying, for all of my EKS changes that I extracted here, make sure the version is in one of these allowed versions,
I see. I see. And then in this
right?
case, it's for a platform team that, for example, one of the use cases that I see a lot of platform teams, they want to make sure that when a cluster gets created, it gets created
Mm-hmm.
with the recent version. Like, for example, now we have 32, 31, and 30. Those are the standard support. But if you deploy a 129 or 128, you get into extended support. And that's an extra fee that you have to pay, almost like six
Right.
times the amount of what it costs standard support. So some customers are cost aware. So this is what I was talking about. Kyverno can help you manage costs by having guardrails, right? That you make sure that the
Absolutely.
clusters are created in that way. And in this case, yeah, it's a very simple. Is it this is cell or this is James path?
This is cell, right? So this is all, again, it's a validating policy, right? Which is very similar to what you would do in Kubernetes, but we're applying it on a JSON payload, and it's all based on cell.
And this is Kyverno. So I don't have, well, if people are just getting started, right, to learn this
Right.
technology, they don't have to use Nirmata Control Hub. They can just start with
No,
these policies.
absolutely.
Maybe use the Kyverno CLI, the Kyverno
Yes.
JSON, put it into their Jenkins pipeline, get
Yep.
something working, and then when they want to move into a scale like a central reporting, having the benefits of Control
Exactly.
Hub, they don't have to rewrite these policies, right? They just work out of the box.
No,
They don't have
yeah.
to do anything special for Nimata for these policies.
No, it's all the same. We don't add any abstraction layers on top of the policy itself. But what we are providing value is in the collaboration, the workflows, the remediation, all of those other things, reporting, alerting, everything else you need to scale up with policy as code. But the
Yeah. So
policy
for
itself,
example,
there's
the
no
remediation,
changes.
right? The remediation
Yeah,
that you said, like you can start with like, I'm going to block that you cannot deploy EKS 127.
right.
What's the remediation? When you use Nimata, Nimata will tell you, well, these are the versions that are allowed, right? And give you
Yep.
the recommendation and the patch, and then you just patch it, right? For the developer team in the CI.
Exactly. Right. So that's but I was playing around also with AWS Q, right? And that did a pretty good job of remediating. So let's try that and see if we can, I'll tell it to run this command, and actually let's see if it can fix the violation that we run, right? So you're like I'm running, and this is just a Q chat, like the developer
Amazon.
that
Yeah,
I
this is
started.
for folks watching. You can get Amazon QCLI. It's free. You don't have to pay for an LLM. You get a free tier. You can use it as much as you want. Amazon QCLI, and then you do Q chat, and now you're prompting. You're chatting with something that can read files, execute things in your terminal.
Yeah. So let's tell it to run this command, and see if it can help us fix the violations, right? So, and I kind of did bits and pieces of this first. I'm curious to see if the whole thing will take the output and do it, and then we can help it with some of the other facts. So we'll say run the command, and let's give it this command, and help me fix the policy violations.
Yeah, and
So
I bet and Amazon QCLI also supports MCP server, and that's the news I was mentioning this morning. One of my posts that we released an Amazon EKS MCP server that you can plug to any of these tools, including Amazon QCLI. And I was going to say, Jim, I bet someone is already writing an MCP server for Cell or for Kyverno or for open source to share it out there, right?
yep, we are. Yeah, so we are in the process of creating one, and we will be announcing very soon. We're also working with the K agent, community, right? And we'll make that enabled over there. So notice, by the way, it said ran the command, it picked up the violations.
Yeah, 3
And now
policy
it's telling
violations.
us the 3 endpoint version and the log types, right? So pretty cool. It's telling us, okay, it can do this. So let's say, yeah, we trust you to make this change. So it set it to false, and instead of the public endpoint. And now it's changing the version to the version which is in the allowed list, right? So
Yep.
132, because it was too
And
new, we don't have
yeah,
that
some
yet.
companies are not in 1.32 because it
Right.
takes time. Like the guardrails and the standards, not always the latest, right? They're
Yep.
on 1.30, and these are the allowed versions. So we want that version, not just the latest.
Exactly. Yeah. So now, so
This
it's
is
running
super
the
cool.
plan again, right? So my credentials expired, so we'll have to.
I have some people already liking this. So yeah, you can try this at home. Super simple.
Yep.
Terraform, Kyverno policies. And
Yep.
then yeah, these LLMs are smart. Like there's so much information. This is the beauty of having open source, right? There's so much Git repositories out there with so much documentation. Your website, right? The Kyverno website has information in there that all these LLMs are getting trained and with that information, and are able to understand the nuances of like, what is the Kyverno policy? What is Cell? Like Cell is, I'm not going to lie, Cell is not something that, oh yeah, I know Cell. It's a policy language, right? You have to sit down the same way with other ones, right? But these tools can help you, like, well, I missed a typo here, or how do I express this? Today I was playing with this and I was asking it, well, from this Kyverno policy, how do I, or I was trying to understand how do I build a query with that I can use in Kyverno policy to extract certain information. So for example, I was trying to say, from this Terraform plan, give me the bucket from all the buckets, S3 buckets that I'm creating, give me the bucket that has the name resource example, and give me back the name, right? Because maybe I want to make sure that the name of the S3 buckets follow certain standard in the policy. I can use LLMs and Amazon QCLI to help me build that, like something that, instead of me before, I was going in the web and doing a web search to see if I can find an example. But these things actually can help you build the Kyverno policies.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's very, very cool, and like definitely worth leveraging. Yeah, so and you saw like here, if I look at my again Git status in my repo, it should have fixed the 3 things. So if we do git diff, right, so it fixed exactly what we wanted to, and now it's in Terraform, which is very nice. and easy to kind of do and use and incorporate into workflows. And then so obviously these demos were slightly simpler, but imagine if you have something more complex, does a pretty good job of figuring it out and recommending the right things or even giving other suggestions.
So how new is this feature in Kyverno? Because I think I'm very like up to date on things. I had not heard about Terraform and Kyverno, those two words, in any of my conversations that I
Yeah.
have with my Kubernetes nerd friends or customers.
It is fairly so that these policies are to be launched in April, but we haven't, so two myths about Kyverno. One I mentioned earlier that, oh, you can't use Kyverno for complex checks, which is incorrect. You can. And secondly, we launched actually Kyverno JSON, which is now being replaced by this validating policy with JSON mode
Okay.
in April, right? So it's fairly new and it's in alpha, so we haven't marketed it like too much, like I haven't advertised it too much in the community, but we have like some key users and others, like even some of our customers at Nirmata or mutual customers with AWS, they are using it and super excited, right? Because this has been long awaited and requested in the community for a long time.
Yeah, and I bet like the percentage of customers that use Nirmata, right? They will be asking you like, yeah, you give me a
Yep.
very beautiful central hub, but only addresses Kubernetes. Like I
Yeah,
have more
that's
things in my IT,
right.
right? Why do I need to go to this hub only for the
Yep.
Kubernetes thing, and then this other one for the cloud stuff, and then
Yeah.
this other one for the Terraform pipelines, right? Can you give me a unified view of everything in one place?
Exactly. And that's the thinking behind Control Hub, and that's what we're evolving into. And more, we're incorporating different. Control Hub was always focused on workflows for DevSecOps teams. But now, of course, workflows can be agentic, and there's new power that's coming. So lots of exciting things on our roadmap as well, all around Kyverno and making it more powerful and easier to use.
And what about, and now that we're thinking about that, this is maybe a dumb question. Like Terraform, a lot of people I see Terraform being used
Right.
in a way that they save the state in S3 bucket. Like they do a Terraform,
Yeah.
they do the Terraform apply, the output of that state goes into the S3 bucket. What is preventing me from using Kyverno and going through all my state files that are on my deployments and making sure those things are valid, right? This is more like in shift left, I'm catching it at the Terraform apply,
Yeah.
but I already did apply for the last 2 years. I already have a lot of
Right.
Terraform
Yeah.
state files sitting in S3. Can I start writing policies to check, to double check, right? Double check, prevent something that it should not be longer be used, but how do I find the things that are not following the guardrails or the new standard in the company? I
Yeah.
should be able to write a job or
Yep.
a Python script that goes on S3 buckets and start like checking those state files against Kyverno policies. Is that like
Absolutely.
a dumb use case or that's a valid use case?
No, no, that's a very valid use case, and we are seeing folks doing that, right? Because, like you said, so in Kubernetes, if you're running in the cluster, Kyverno can do background scanning for resources. But for Terraform, once it's already deployed, you might have a new policy that now there's a new violation, right? So you want to capture those violations, and you want to, like, if you're scanning them with NCTL, it'll all be piped to Control Hub, which becomes part of your compliance reporting, and there's a full audit trail to say when was that repo scanned, when was the new policy introduced, why is this violation, and it'll actually even route it to the right team if you set it up correctly, right? So yeah, that's a very valid use case and necessary because policies change, right?
Yeah.
Standards change, new vulnerabilities are found, so there's misconfigurations and best practices that are evolved, so you do need to scan existing configurations as well.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, like the use case of this, right? In a few months, I think or in a while, like one like right now in standard support is 132, 131, and
Yeah.
130. When 130 becomes extended support, I no longer want clusters with 130,
Correct.
right? So I can go and run the scanning of those S3 Terraform things and then find who's not deploying through Terraform to that, right? And have the reporting in Control Hub,
Right.
centralized. So yeah, I think that's something that users will start, but just a simple pipeline, right? So I think what this could be more knowledgeable. I think you're building some more policies out of the box, the best practices, right? So you
Yes.
don't even have to write policies. You already, like Kyverno actually became a little bit more popular. I have to say, I've been following it. It became a little bit more popular once you provided a library of policies. Because
Right.
people were
Right.
like, this is a great tool.
Yeah.
What are the other people writing? Like, can you share your policy? And somebody would share a policy. And then how do I create one? So
Yep.
the project said, we're going to invest. We're going to write the policies, and we're going to have a standard set that people can get started, because it's very difficult to find like policies that people have written before. So you are writing policies for this Terraform use cases, and that would get you more adoption, I think, on people getting started quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're always adding more, right? So both in the community, and Nirmata also maintains a curated policy set, which is free, like anybody can, use it and download it. So, but we all, test it across different versions of Kubernetes and Terraform and other kind of, enforcement points. So it's just best practices, and, kind of it benefits everybody to have that. Because again, like there's, like from our perspective, we don't want policies to be hard to write or hard to kind of manage, but you can quickly get a working sample, and if you need to customize it, you can, or you can, use this as is to get started.
Okay. Well, Jim, I
Very
think we
cool.
are out of time today. I appreciate
Yeah,
it. I think we cover all the things that we kind of like did an agenda
absolutely.
on the fly. Like, let's talk about Kyverno, Terraform, Control Hub, and some agentic AI. I think we cover all the checks for today. And we have people joining from Canada, from different places. I think Los Angeles. People were saying that Canada, and how can they reach you out? Jim, what's the call to action before
Yeah,
we end?
so if you're on the Kubernetes or CNCF Slack channel, I'm easy to find over there. Just Jim Baguadia, or either on X or Twitter or LinkedIn. Same name everywhere. So just look me up, send me a connect request. Would love to chat and discuss.
Yeah, and join the Kyverno community, right? Reach out to their Slack. They do meetings, right? So if you want to contribute to open source, Kyverno is a great project to contribute and start learning. If you are like a student or somebody that wants to get into open source, now you can say Kyverno is not only for the Kubernetes use case. Now it's a full DevOps policy engine. So thank you, folks. Thank you, Gene. Appreciate it. Super happy of having you on board, like always. And we'll see you, everyone. And stay tuned if you're watching here, because we have another live stream coming up that we're going to be talking about the new MCP servers for ECS and EKS from Sai, which is a solutions architect in my team. And see you, everyone, to the next show. See you, folks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.